Let's do it. Are we streaming? Excellent. Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Republican Primary Gubernatorial Candidate Forum for a discussion of economic priorities and principles. I'm Teresa Foxley, President and CEO of EDCUtah, and I'm joined by my friend, co-host, and co-moderator, Derek Miller, President of the Salt Lake Chamber. We are streaming live today from the Grand America Hotel in Salt Lake City. Before I turn the time over to Derek, I'd like to share with our audience that we are in adherence to the recommended moderate risk guidelines and protocols provided by the state during today's forum. Each person with us on site is under strict orders to practice social distancing of 6 feet, to wear a mask as much as possible, and adhere to the gathering requirements.
Thanks, Teresa. This forum will focus on economic recovery from COVID-19, as well as longer-term growth strategies for the state, issues that are top of mind for all Utahns. We plan to be here for about 90 minutes. Let me introduce our candidate participants, and then Teresa will explain the ground rules. In alphabetical order, please welcome Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox, former Speaker of the House Greg Hughes, former Governor John Huntsman Jr., and business executive Thomas Wright. Gentlemen, congratulations and thank you for joining us today. We look forward to your insights and to a lively discussion.
Candidates, we will refer to each of you by your last name for the remainder of this forum. The format is as follows. Starting from the audiences, or in this case, the virtual audiences left to right, we will ask each candidate to explain in 4 minutes or less their plans to accelerate Utah's recovery from the economic effects of this pandemic. For that question, we will start with Mr. Cox, and we will finish with Mr. Huntsman. For the second question, we will ask the candidates to explain their longer-term vision for growing the economy of Utah. We will start with Mr. Hughes and finish with Mr. Cox, asking each candidate to take another 4 minutes for their answer. At the end of each candidate's long-term vision, the moderators will ask a follow-up question based on either their immediate or long-term visions. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to that follow-up question. Those questions will be asked to the candidates, picking up in the order where we left off in round 2, i.e. Mr. Wright, Mr. Huntsman, Mr. Cox, and Mr. Hughes.
We should emphasize that we are on a tight time frame today. Because we don't want to interrupt candidates in a way that may be perceived as unequal, we will turn off each candidate's microphone at the end of the time allotment. This is not out of disrespect for the person speaking, but rather a sign of respect for all of the candidates. Please accept our apologies if we are forced to do this.
Our third and fourth rounds of questions were curated from suggestions that came in from the members and investors of the Chamber and EDCUtah. In other words, these are top-of-mind concerns for the business community. We have randomly drawn and assigned 4 different questions for round 3. We will start that round with Mr. Huntsman and finish with Mr. Wright. Each candidate will be presented with a different question this round and will have 2 minutes for their answer.
In round 4, we'll start with Mr. Cox and finish with Mr. Huntsman. Each candidate in round 4 will have the same question to answer, plus 1 additional minute for a total of 3 minutes should they wish to address a topic raised in round 3.
The 5th round is designed to allow candidates the opportunity to back up and support their proposed policies. We have asked each candidate to submit a question for each of the other candidates. We have randomly drawn from those questions and will anonymously pose 1 question to each candidate submitted by a fellow candidate. That round will start with Mr. Hughes and conclude with Mr. Cox.
And finally, time permitting, we will conclude this forum by allowing each candidate to give a brief closing statement. That round will start with Mr. Wright and conclude with Mr. Hughes. Timekeepers ready? Candidates ready? Let's start with round 1. Mr. Cox, the impact of COVID-19 has been deep and acute. What is your plan for recovery?
Thank you, Derek. And ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here with my fellow candidates tonight. It's been far too long since we've been in a room together. It's an honor to be with you. I hope your wives and children are doing well. 11 years ago, Governor Gary Herbert assumed office during the deepest recession in the past 80 years. It has been an incredible honor to work side by side with him and with you as we together as Utahns built the strongest economy in the country. We led the nation with unemployment at 2.3%, the lowest in the nation and the lowest in our state's history. We led the nation in private sector job growth. We were the most diverse economy in the country. We were lauded across the nation and across the world as the premier economy anywhere on a global scale. And then, in a matter of just a few weeks, this awful virus came and took all of it away from us, destroying lives and destroying livelihoods. Obviously, a lot has changed over the past 7 weeks. We're once again facing an economic collapse, and once again, we need a leader who is committed to Utah. Just this morning, we found out more economic numbers. And quite frankly, they're scary. Another 3.2 million Americans are out of work. And of course, Utah has not been spared. My heart aches for those families who have lost loved ones, those families who have lost their jobs, and those families who have lost businesses. More than ever, I stand committed to you that as your governor, we will rebuild this economy. We have had hard times before in the state of Utah. In fact, our history is a history of hard times. But as Utahns, we will do what we always do, and that is rebuild together. The good news is that there is an economic recovery plan. Immediately upon facing the threat of this virus, we did two things. We brought together the best and brightest minds in the state to focus on the health crisis that was immediately at hand. We also brought together an economic team, an unprecedented economic team led by Derek Miller and other leadership here at the Chamber of Commerce who brought together the best and brightest minds from our state's economic leaders. Dozens of association leaders from business and business leaders came together to work on a plan to get Utah back to business. Now, there are far too many people who have tried to tear us apart and tell us that you either have to focus on the economy or you have to focus on people's health, and you can't do both. We reject that notion. We believe that we can, by saving people's lives, by flattening the curve, we could open up sooner than anyone else in the state. Or in the country. Now, I'm very proud of our response. We were one of only 7 states that did not do a statewide lockdown. And we were one of the first 5 states to begin reopening for business. This is a huge deal, and it's bringing people back to work, but we still have further to go. The organizations here, the Chamber of Commerce and so many others, understand that the health and safety of Utahns will lead to a more robust and quicker economic recovery. We acted fast to prevent the spread of the virus, not just to save lives, but to save our economy. And the way we know that it's working is, I can tell you right now, we have had dozens of governors contact the state asking us if they could use our recovery plan. The White House released a list of 7 states that will lead the economic recovery in this country, and Utah was one of them. Just today, Harvard University announced that Utah is one of only 9 states that was safe enough to rebuild and reopen their economy. The results speak for themselves. The history of Utah is a history of working together, a history of rebuilding. We will do what we have always done. We will rebuild together.
Mr. Hughes, the impact of COVID-19 has been deep and acute. What is your plan for recovery?
Thank you, Derek. Here's it's a loud mic. I think we're in unusual times, and sometimes when it's time to lead, you have to have uncomfortable conversations. And this is going to be one of those uncomfortable conversations that I think in this campaign as candidates we need to have. But we're going to have this with the citizenry as well, Utahns. I don't know if anything you just heard by way of this plan reflects the lives of the people who were forced from their jobs to go home, from the businesses that were asked to be shut down, not by an economy that slowed down, but by government's heavy hand. I don't know if how this rosy recovery or the first state to recover is actually impacting the lives of the people that live in this state. And I would argue that it doesn't. And I'd tell you that we have a lot of states and a lot of governors that argued that the impact to the economy and what it meant to the economy to not have commerce occur, and your Get Back to Work plan being hand in glove part of your public safety plan. We had governors calling for this in mid-March. We had time to absolutely not do one without the other. And when I hear all these people that somehow got together and came up with a famous plan. And by the way, you're the Chamber of Commerce. The word commerce is in your name, okay? I'm going to tell you right now that we have bills that people face in their households, in their businesses, every 30 days. You have overhead, you have payroll, you have a mortgage to pay, you have other expenses. How is that being contemplated? How is that being planned for? If it was that we were supposed to have the government, the federal government, print enough money, well, we saw how the first tranche of money, the $2.2 billion went. The SBA on a Friday afternoon released this Paycheck Protection Program. By Monday morning, financial institutions were telling small businesses the money was already committed and it was already gone. How do you capitalize this economy? How do people have money to pay the bills? How do jobs and businesses that people have built over years and generations, how do they make payroll? How do they cover the overhead? If we think that the federal government can print enough money to replace economic activity, and if we don't have a get back to work plan that is hand in glove at the same time, part of our public health safety plan, then we're fooling ourselves. I think that the impact of this state and the shortfalls that we'll see, because there's, again, without the economic activity going on, you don't have tax collection. We had, when I was a legislator in the Great Recession, we had a $10 billion budget, and we had about a $1 billion shortfall. This is at least a Great Recession in its nature. That's $2 billion shortfall if it were to follow suit. Where are we making up that money? How's that going to happen? Is it federal funds? I've never seen a federal dollar that makes our state stronger. I've never seen it create more states' rights. I've never seen a state be able to build its budget in a stronger way as it collects or receives more federal funds. But we're going to have a gravitational pull towards those federal funds as we see that this budget is in clear and probably unprecedented shortfall. So we can talk about how great this was and how we got everyone together to make this plan such a grand success. I don't think that's translating across this state at all. My plan will be that we have to, without fear. Fear is contagious. Fear really is contagious, but so is courage. This state was founded on hard times, difficult times, tough times. Tough times don't last, but tough people do. We'll come out of this just like we did the Great Recession. But we're going to have to get realistic about, you can't burn down this village to save the village. We're going to have smart precautions on how we distance ourselves. Business owners are in the same boat everyone else is in terms of making sure their patrons don't get sick, their employees don't. But getting back to work has to happen today, not a month from now.
Mr. Wright, the impact of COVID-19 has been deep and acute. What is your plan for recovery?
Well, first, thank you to the Chamber, and thanks to EDCUtah, Derek and Teresa. It's great to see you and practice safe social distancing. And it's great to be here with my opponents. I want to thank them for their hard work in this race and to the sacrifices that their families are making. Running for public office is difficult, and they should all be commended. COVID-19 hit us out of nowhere. Nobody saw this coming, and it has been devastating. And as a small business owner, I can tell you that in addition to the health impacts that we have had, and they're serious and they're severe, and I want to thank our healthcare workers and the people on the front line that are making it happen, the impact of small business has been absolutely devastating. I have 14 offices in the state of Utah. I have 48 employees, and the impact that I have seen on them, and going to bed every night worrying about how we're going to make payroll, how we're going to make our mortgage payment, our lease payments, how we're going to stay in business, how we're going to deliver our service to our clients, how we're going to redefine ourselves, has been absolutely traumatizing for many small business people across this state. And I uniquely understand that. And that's why I'm glad I'm in this race, because I am not from government. I've never held public elected office. My opponents have all had plenty of time to serve and to give, and I thank them for that. And I believe it's time for a new direction in this state. So when the dust settles from COVID-19 and we get back to the new normal, we're going to find people whose lives have been dramatically impacted. Savings accounts, stock portfolios, housing. We're going to see a lot of impacts, and it's going to be tough. So I do have some thoughts for a short-term economic recovery program. And the Thomas Wright Rob Bishop team has put a lot of thought into this, and we're going to post it on our website, wrightutah.com. I can't give you all the details, but I want you to go see it, because we have a comprehensive, thoughtful plan for economic recovery and getting our economy back on its feet. And as a small business owner, I uniquely know how to do this. I understand the challenges. I've lived this life for 12 years where I've looked at balance sheets and financial statements, and I know the decisions that I make every day not only affect me and my family, but they affect my employees and their family and their ability to provide for them. But here are 4 things that we need to do immediately. Number 1, we need to cut budgets to meet our revenue shortfalls. We have to look immediately, we have to start projecting at what the revenue shortfalls are going to be, and state government needs to do exactly what the citizens and the families of the state are doing, tightening their belt, reducing their overhead, and making ends meet with the revenue we have. And it's going to be a shortfall. We know that. We're going to have to make it happen. Number 2, we need to enact a hiring freeze and a capital projects freeze. When you're a business owner and you go through tough times, you take care of the people you have, but you put a freeze on hiring, and we need to put a freeze on capital projects. If there's buildings out there that are critical and they're critical infrastructure projects, that's fine. We can take a look at those. But the idea that we'd spend tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars on new buildings that are slated for this year in the state budget is not responsible. We need to put a freeze on those, and we need to make sure that that capital is available to help get our economy back on track. Number 3, we need to reallocate economic incentives to support Utah-based businesses. If we put the money that we've been incentivizing into recruiting companies to come here to all businesses in the state of Utah, we could reduce the rate for all businesses. Then everybody wins. We're not picking winners and losers. And in addition to that, we're attracting businesses to come here because they'll be benefiting from that same low rate that Utah business owners like myself deserve and need during these economic times. And 4th, we need to conduct a full analysis of Utah's unemployment compensation program. What we have right now is a compensation program for the unemployed that's taxing their unemployment. The caps aren't big enough, and it's disincentivizing them from getting part-time work, because if they get part-time work, then they may lose their full-time unemployment benefit. We need to look at that program from top to bottom. We should have done it during good economic times and planned for the future. We didn't, but we need to do it now to make sure it's competitive and that those 150,000 Utahns that are unemployed can get back on their feet.
Mr. Huntsman, the impact of COVID-19 has been deep and acute. What is your plan for recovery?
Thank you, Derek. It's a pleasure to be with you, as it is to be with Teresa. Thank you, and for the organizations you represent. You ask about a goal. It's pretty simple. I think we have the opportunity for a rebirth, and I don't think we should shoot for anything short of a rebirth. We've been through the most traumatic event, both in terms of health, our lives, and our economy. It's impacted education. It's impacted all aspects of our lives. And we don't just want a recovery. We want to learn how we have changed and what that means for our future. This is not about the past. This is about a much different trajectory that the state will be on. And if we don't get that lesson, then we haven't learned anything during the last 8 weeks. But I'm excited, and I'll tell you, Derek, why. Because out of adversity comes greatness, and out of failure and catastrophe often comes the greatest innovation and change this nation has seen. And we're at one such moment. So I'm excited about what this could yield, because people are thinking differently about problem solving. They're thinking differently about their businesses. They're going to build them differently. They're going to operate them differently. But let me just share this with you, because I'm not a great politician. I have to get to specifics. And let me also mention Michelle Kafusi, my great running mate, who was mayor of Provo, who I've learned so much from. She's on the front lines of all of this, getting the work done in one of our most important cities, and I'm truly grateful for her. And condolences to all of those who have lost loved ones in this calamity of ours. But number one, thank you to small business, because they're the unsung heroes. They're 90% of our base. They've hung out that sign, closed for business. They've turned out the lights, and they've gone to explain it to their families, and sometimes in inexplicable ways. So thank you to small business. Number two, we don't need lectures. We don't need more working groups. We don't need green, yellow, red indicators. We need cash. That's what businesses need, plain and simple. We need to take money out of the rainy day fund on an emergency basis and help through a line of credit that we can give to small businesses. Number three, we need to work with our terrific banking community to help bridge the gap, because they have access to cheap capital, 25 basis points through the Fed window, and they can do creative things in terms of deferring and becoming more flexible in terms of repayment schedules, also providing additional working capital, critically important. 4, tax holidays. How about creatively using property and sales taxes to get people through the next month, next few months? I mean, this is cash to them. This is what they need. They don't need more lectures about the future. Number 5, payroll tax incentives that we could create for those who keep employees on the payroll. Because at the end of the day, our clarion call to small business should be keep people on the payroll. That's where they belong. This is a short-term problem we're up against. We need a short-term solution. If people are let go, then chances are we're going to run the risk of structural unemployment longer term. And finally, we need to get in the business of retraining people who are not going to be able to go back to their previous jobs, who are middle-aged, down on their luck, perhaps suffering from mental health issues that are going to need the kind of retraining that will give them hope and a sense of purpose to get moving again. So short term, if we're able to accomplish some of that, I'd be a very happy man.
Thank you, Mr. Huntsman. Let's move on to round 2. Mr. Hughes, once we recover, what is your long-term vision for growing the state's economy?
This changes. I think this COVID-19 and this pandemic changes how you view a long-term plan. I think the long-term plan has to be fast-tracked. One of the things the Chamber has led out on in the past is developing a Utah Port Authority here in the state. We got it on the statute. We have a Port Authority with a board. This presents an incredible opportunity for our state where we know that there's a global supply chain. We know that it's strong. I think what we're learning from COVID-19 is that we want to be a stronger manufacturer. We want to create more things than we might receive by way of imports. Nobody, no state in the union has greater transportation infrastructure advantages than the state of Utah. It's not one location or one area. It's a system of U.S. custom bonded ports that if you have rail that comes from every port, which we have inland ports in the United States east of the Rockies, we have inland ports around the world. And what they are is a logistics solution where you have a bottleneck of ships and container ships coming in to these ports that are unable to come in and getting imports and exports going. Those inland ports by rail create a relief where you can have that inspection for items coming in as well as exports going out inland, and it creates a more efficient system. That system also creates an ecosystem for the economy and economic growth. That means that on coastal ports as well as inland ports, we have seen the economies grow. We've seen manufacturing created, the suppliers that would be part of that manufacturing. When you understand that in every coastal port in the West Coast, every one of those rail lines, thanks to the Intercontinental Railroad coming through Utah, every one of those coastal ports comes through the state of Utah. If you see our road system, I-15 starting in Alaska, going through Canada, the western United States, and through Mexico, 3 countries in one road. I-80 going across and I-70. We have an incredible opportunity to be having that system of U.S. custom bonded ports. That's not a long-term play in terms of a decade from now. We have to do this quickly. We have a Uinta Basin that is in terrible straits due to the barrel actually being more valuable than the oil or crude inside of it now with the world economy and with crude. They need that relief right away. That county is suffering right now. People are losing their jobs, and county commissioners are reaching out without even an understanding of how to deal with the economic impact happening in that county now. That would be a great county to begin a system of U.S. custom bonded ports and begin there. I asked Jack Hedge, who's the executive director, I said, I'm too impatient for a blue ribbon panel to last a decade. I want to be able to tell voters, I want to tell people in town hall meetings that in the first 2 years of a 4-year administration, we would have the first of a system of U.S. custom bonded ports operable. So the first of a system would be operable in the first 2 years. He said it would be hard. I didn't want to lie. So I said, it has to be true. Can we do it? He said, it'd be very hard, but yes, we can do that. So that's something we would fast track and do, I think, as fast as we can. The way you do it also, when we talk about the congestion and all the quality of life issues that we see along the Wasatch Front, where 80% of the population lives, where most of the job growth has occurred over time. When we say that this state's population is going to double by the year 2050, I don't know that it's sustainable in just 4 counties in a 130-mile valley that is hyper-focused. Our infrastructure investment of water, rail, and roads throughout this whole state, or throughout the whole state and these counties, some counties having never seen economic growth. When we do that, I've met these county commissioners, I've met people in these town hall meetings. They know what economies they have. If they can get to market, if we can lower those barriers, we do that right away. And then with the inland ports, we create that ecosystem for the economy to grow even more. That keeps those kids living where they grew up, and our kids don't have to leave out of state. They could go there instead.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Mr. Wright, once we recover, what is your long-term vision for growing the state's economy?
Great question. I loved the conversation we've had about the short term, and it's nice to kick to the long term now. I've broken my long-term strategies into 3 different categories. And again, it's on the website. I've always not cared for candidates that promoted their website on a debate, but now I know why they do, because there's just no way you can go over so many things in this much detail. These are my 3 categories. Number 1, it's funding our priorities. Number 2, tax relief. And number 3, investment. So let's start with funding your priorities. You can tell a lot about a person, a business, or a state by the way they spend their money. If you want to know what somebody really believes in and where their heart lies, look at where they spend their money. Let's look at our state budget now during this difficult time and find a silver lining to this pandemic and say, are we spending the money the way according to our priorities and the way we want to in the state of Utah? I believe if we look at the budget in that light, we'll find that there's a lot of things that we can do to improve. And I talked about reallocating economic incentives. That's one of funding our priorities. Putting a moratorium on capital projects. But we also need to utilize the state's bonding capacity. We have a AAA bond rating. We need to be modest in using it so we maintain it. But we have it for times like this. We should look at it. 2, we need to make sure we're using the rainy day fund. That's why we have it. That's taxpayers' money that's being held there. It should be used to help people who are now struggling, taxpayers who are struggling. Another idea we had is exploring the school trust land fund. There is a lot of assets there. We are just using the interest that we're earning, but there is a lot of opportunity there. I think a business-minded person could look at that. I think we could get more out of that. That's going to take legislative leadership. That's going to take a longer process, but it's worth looking at. We also need to look at eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. I was on the campaign trail pre-pandemic. A state employee grabbed me in the parking lot after the event, and he said, "Do you know who I am?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Good, I'm not going to tell you my name." He said, "But I just got a new computer monitor for my desk, and I saw the invoice in the box with $475 or some amount like that. If my amount's wrong to whoever that is, I apologize. But it was around the $475. He said, "I got on Amazon, and that monitor was more like $175. We need to incentivize our public employees to come forward. They have the best ideas for how we can run the most efficient government. If we encourage them and incentivize them, they will come forward and they will tell us how we can eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse." The second category was tax relief. We need to suspend the state income tax of unemployment benefits. I talked about that in the first round. 2, we need to suspend the state and local sales tax on food. If it was wrong to tax food at 4.875 under the tax reform bill that was repealed, it's wrong to tax it at 1.75, especially during times like this. We need to suspend the state sales tax on food. 3, we need to create a temporary pandemic abatement program for property taxes. We need to help low and moderate income people stay in their homes. We already have an affordable housing crisis. They're going to struggle to pay property taxes. There's a way through truth and taxation to make this possible, and we need to make it happen. Number 4, we need to allow families to access their 529 accounts penalty-free. If they've put money away for their kids for college, let's let them access it so that they can help themselves now. They can put it back in, and there'll be no penalty for doing it. Finally, investment. You have to invest in your future. There's no better way to invest than investing in the citizens of this state. We have incredible citizens. And if we use our vocational schools, our system of higher education, and we allow them to retrain themselves, they will do it. A lot of the jobs that have been lost are not going to come back. And those employees know that. There's 150,000 people in the state that have lost their jobs. Let's get them training to be framers and carpenters and hairstylists and mechanics, and using our great vocational schools and system of higher education to retool their skills to get them back out into the workforce. We've had shortages of teachers, healthcare professionals for a long time. Let's solve it now with the opportunity we have by allowing people to retrain and get back into the workforce.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Mr. Huntsman, once we recover, what is your long-term plan for growing the economy of this state?
This is when things get good. We're only going to recover if the national economy recovers, and the national economy is only going to recover if the global economy recovers. I know something about this economy. I know something about the national economy. I know a whole lot about the global economy. Not a great politician, but I know something about the people who make critical decisions that make the global economy work, and I want to make sure I can leverage those relationships as governor. So I believe there's going to be a massive disaggregation of capital in the post-COVID period. Capital that was allocated for safe investments, originally thought to be safe investments, China, for example, I think that capital is going to be redeployed somewhere else. And I think we have a huge opportunity if we follow a few key steps over the longer term to position our state like it's never been positioned before. And I understand positioning states because I was part of positioning this state when I was governor. And you, Derek, came to work for GoEd, which I created, and did a great job. So a lot of other things that happened during that period. But to start the discussion, we need Utah to be seen as a safe haven because there's a flocking to safe markets right now. People are going to move to safe markets. Capital is going to aggregate in safe markets. We should become known as the safest market in the world. I think it's going to take a rebranding. Now, we started the Life Elevated rebranding campaign. That's run 15 years. It's been great. But I think we need Crossroads of the world. That's what we should aspire to be. And when people recognize us as such, it's going to automatically up our game. Number two, we need to redefine our cluster development and build on the original 7 concepts that we put forward many, many years ago. We need to focus on the 4th industrial revolution industries. Aerospace, national security, cyber should be areas where we have competencies, not only in training and education, but in manufacturing. Medical technology, advanced therapies, diagnostics. Biotechnology, an area where we're woefully underperforming. We should be a world center for biotechnology. We've got universities, we've got great small companies, innovation here and there, but we haven't yet found our cruising altitude. Regional Finance Center. We got Goldman Sachs. That's great. It's helped the downtown area. But we don't have more than that. Let's leverage up on financial technology and make that a cluster of growth. Number 3, I think we need a headquarters strategy. We're still a state without a Fortune 500 headquarters, which is, you can argue that both ways. But why are headquarters important? Because they feed into accounting, legal, and advisory work. They hire a whole lot of people locally, and they do great things for the local housing market. So I'm one who thinks a headquarters strategy is important. Workforce development, reimagining the post-COVID training environment, what our needs are. I want to expand EDCUtah partnerships with businesses like we've never seen it before. I want to deepen the integration with EDCUtah in our high school programs so we can begin to get the next generation of workers trained well in advance and excited about the prospects of the marketplace. Development of talent. Because we're great entrepreneurs in this state, and then we take companies to a certain level. We don't always manage them, and we always kind of sell out at that point. I think we need managers here, having the kind of infrastructure, intellectual capabilities to bring that along would be great. And 5th, rural development strategy, where we begin to see our wonderful rural areas as something more than just county by county, but region by region, where they can leverage up their capabilities. Carbon Emery, Weber Davis, Washington Iron. There's so much more that we can do there.
Thank you. Mr. Cox, it's your turn. Tell us about your long-term vision for growing the state's economy.
Thank you, Teresa. If we'd been doing this 8 weeks ago, we would have been talking about growing pains here in the state of Utah. I much prefer talking about the growing pains than the shrinking pains, but we understand that things have changed over those past 7 weeks. As a country, we used to be a country of builders, and now we've become a country of consumers, and consumption is important. But it's time for us and Utah to lead out as a state of builders again. We talk a lot about infrastructure and the power of infrastructure. There's a formula that I use often as we talk about growth in the state and those growing pains that we were experiencing. And that's when infrastructure precedes growth, the quality of life remains high and grows. But when growth precedes infrastructure, the quality of life declines. We have opportunities over the next few years to build and to grow in powerful ways. We've heard a little bit about the EDCUtah Rail project. That should be first and foremost helping those communities out in a real and powerful way with infrastructure growth. We've talked a little bit about the inland port already. the point of the mountain, the changes that are happening there with the prison being moved, gives us an unprecedented opportunity to show what real growth and real building can look like in powerful ways. Now, let me pivot just a little bit, though. We talk about getting back to normal, and we can't wait to get back to normal. But right now, we have an opportunity to have a better normal, to rethink what we've learned through this crisis and how we rebuild in a better way. Now, last week, Senator Henderson, my running mate, Deidre Henderson, who's incredible, and I put out our plan for a more resilient Utah as we move forward. It's a 7-point plan. You can visit it on our website, not on Thomas's, votecox.com. And I won't go through all 7 points, but I'm excited about what the future holds when we look at those opportunities. One of the things that we learned very early in this crisis is that global supply chains are not as secure as we once thought. Those global supply chains have been breaking down. It's time to bring the manufacturing of critical goods back to the United States, and importantly, back here to the state of Utah to provide those jobs. And we've seen that as our own manufacturers are now pivoting and changing to make the masks, to make the swabs that we need to fight this virus. We have incredible capacity with our Manufacturers Association here, and we can change that. We can make it better. We can bring those jobs back from places like China that are not secure and that are not our good friends and allies. The second thing we need to do is think more critically about our strategic storage. We need to have a strategic petroleum storage space right here in the state of Utah. We can do that. It's something we've been working on over the past year. Most people don't know this, but right now the U.S. strategic petroleum storage space closest to us is 1,500 miles away. If there is an earthquake, if we have a natural disaster of some sort, we can't rely on the federal government to give us what we need. We have to be more resilient. We have to be more self-reliant. The third thing we need to do is protect and promote Utah's agricultural interests. Today I just held a press conference with farmers who are struggling. It's crazy to think that we have as many people now eating as many meals as they were before, and yet our farmers are struggling because those supply chains are broken. Agriculture is not just part of our economy, it's a critical piece of that, but it's a part of our national security. We must protect the food that is grown here in the state of Utah and give them an opportunity to participate in the global economy. Finally, there's some things we've learned about using the internet to help us. Online education. Let's not lose what we've gained over the past few weeks as our teachers have really stepped up. Let's use that to supplement what's happening. Let's increase telehealth. We've seen the power of telehealth. And finally, let's fully embrace telework. And in the end, let's not forget rural Utah. As the only candidate that doesn't live on the Wasatch Front, rural Utah has been forgotten for far too long. It's time that we remember that there is life south of the Payson-Dixon line.
Thanks to each one of our candidates for your answers. We now have an opportunity for a follow-up question, unique and specific to each one of you. First, Mr. Wright, you referenced your website. One of the things that is mentioned on your website is creating partnerships with cities and counties to make targeted economic development decisions and investing in homegrown companies and then stay in touch with them so they can succeed. Share with us what those targeted economic development decisions would look like in your administration.
Thank you for a great question. I love this question because as the only business person in the race, as a small business owner, as the only person that's never held public elected office, I love this question because it's an opportunity for us to get out into rural Utah and create economic partnerships to help those communities. And while I appreciate what the Lieutenant Governor said, it's been 6 years that he's been in office, and rural Utah has been totally left behind. When you go to rural Utah, they will tell you time and time again, they never even came out of the last recession. And I've learned on the campaign trail how devastating it is for them to be out there and feel so isolated. So there's a couple things that I think we need to do. Number one, we have learned, as has been said, that connectivity to the internet is vital. If you want to telework, or you want to build a business, or you want to go to school now, you have to be able to get onto the internet. And we can't do that in all places in Utah. Too often, these contracts have been negotiated county by county or city by city. So you will go to one city and they'll say, yeah, there's a fiber line that runs right down the corridor of our valley and it heads down to the other city, but we can't access it. We have no connectivity here. There are cities in this state that don't have cell service or internet access. That is not going to work for Utah long term. We need to connect rural Utah to the internet and make sure that it happens quickly. Number two, rural Utah's different. Meaning, what they want in Panguitch is different than what they want in Tremont. What Tooele needs is different than Vernal. I learned that rural Utah is not just one thing, it's many things. Rural communities know what they need. They have economic diversification plans. They just need help executing them, and they need a support at the state level to make it happen. For example, some of our communities are too dependent on tourism. We need to diversify the economy. So when tourism drops, or tourism is seasonal, they don't feel those economic impacts. As governor, I will have an economic development plan for every rural community that wants state support, and we will tackle the connectivity problem, because in the world we live in today, especially post-pandemic, not being able to connect to the internet is unacceptable in the state of Utah.
Mr. Huntsman, in your opening remarks, you said, let's not just recover, let's learn about the ways in which this pandemic has changed us. Talk to me a little bit about what you have learned.
Well, I think we have learned a lot about the fragility of the international trading system that we rely on. So our agricultural sector is 20% of our state's GDP, and they do a great job. And I worked with them as governor to get product in places like Korea, Japan, China, Taiwan. And with the Asian markets down, the wool producers aren't able to export their product, obviously, because nobody's buying in the textile mills. So the interconnection is very real. But what I think we've realized, now more than ever, is that we have to be a safe haven. I'm getting back to my original thesis here. A safe haven for capital and for ideas and for brainpower. We can make it happen here. Not that this is going to be the final marketplace for all manufacturers or all entrepreneurs, but I think with the supply chains being broken up in China, I know about some of these things. I used to serve on the board of Caterpillar and Ford Motor Company and Chevron. I've been part of the decisions that have made these supply chains real. I understand the intricacies of these supply chains. The disruption is going to occur, and they're going to be looking for new safe havens in which to invest. And I think it never dawned on me to this extent, and nor this rapidly, that we would be confronted with an opportunity that makes me very excited about the state going forward. Picking up some of those pieces of the disrupted supply chains, bringing them here, matching them with labor, matching them with communities, matching them with training programs is a really exciting thought. They're going to go somewhere because China has lost trust. It's lost the trust factor with a lot of people. And so I think the shifts are going to be pretty seismic economically. Somebody's going to get that outflow of capital, that outflow of investment. I want to be it. And I want to make sure we're prepared to receive, but it's coming a lot faster than I ever would have thought. That's one thing.
Mr. Cox, you've been critical at times about Utah's corporate recruitment incentives. What are your thoughts about these programs in light of our current situation and the job losses that have come as a result of COVID-19?
Thank you, Derek. Incentives have a role to play. Now, in a perfect world, we would get rid of all corporate incentives, and every state would be able to compete on the same foothold. And by the way, doing that, Utah wins every time. Now, we recognize that other states are often giving away cash incentives to entice businesses to move or expand in their regions. When I've been critical of our incentives right now, there were a couple reasons for that. Of course, unemployment was at 2.3%. The biggest problem that we had in the state was finding enough workers for the jobs that were already available, especially on the Wasatch Front. Now, why then would we give big tax incentives and breaks to companies to entice them to come here when most of them were coming here anyway? And that's where I have been critical and continue to be critical. Now, of course, the landscape has changed in front of us, but we have to be smarter with those incentives. If we're going to have an incentive program at all, then we must use that incentive program much more wisely. All jobs are important, there's no question about that. But there are certain industries, and again, we've mentioned a few of them already, manufacturers that we can bring back here that bring other industries with them, that help expand the amount of jobs available. We talk about the aerospace industry. I had an opportunity, the only chance I've had as lieutenant governor, to travel to the largest air show in the world, where I met with 40 of the largest aerospace manufacturers in the world, companies that you all know of, Boeing, Airbus, all the big ones, and some that you may not have heard of. And in every one of those discussions, they were looking at Utah as a place where they wanted to expand. We have the youngest workforce. We have an incredible loyal workforce. We have the best economy in the world, and they want to come here. By using those incentives, again, for big manufacturers like that, they bring with them a whole world of ancillary groups that come and create even more jobs. If we're going to incentivize it all, it has to be for those industries that have a ripple effect on the economy in a positive way.
Mr. Hughes, you talked in your opening remarks about there not being enough money that could be printed by the federal government to get this economy back up and running. We know it's the consumers that will drive that. Talk to me a little bit about how you would integrate your health and economic plan to build consumer confidence.
Thank you for the question. So here is the reality of life, whether we want to talk about it or whether we don't. Government can come up with all the plans they want. They can tell you when to get together. They can dictate your right of assembly. They can have, as of yesterday, tell faith leaders how they can meet and worship. They can do all those things. But what I'm going to tell you is going to happen in this state of Utah is people, when they don't have the money in their household to pay their bills, when businesses are about to lose everything, they're going back to work. The problem we face is that we better get in front of that. You don't have a public health safety plan if you don't have a get back to work plan that is as robust as the people feel as desperate as they are. This is not a time you can keep telling people that we're going to let you come in by 20 or you're going to be able to 6 feet, you have to be apart, and then you can go to your church. I want to get back to a normal, okay, that will be an incredible economic and public safety plan that respects right of assembly, that doesn't have General Burton write a letter saying it's non-negotiable. We have a acting Department of Health director saying it's non-negotiable to faith leaders how their congregants can meet inside their church. Now, do you think that they might have the best interests of the people coming to their church at heart? Do you think they need someone from government to tell them what's negotiable or not? You got 3 county commissioners in Washington County elected by the people looking to get their community back to work. You have this same General Burton saying he disapproves of their model and their plan with their doctor, their physician, as the head of their health department. Okay? We have to get real about this. We can keep having these state-heavy plans, but if we want a public health safety plan that promotes and gets this economy started again, we got to get back to some of those normalcies of constitutional liberties, as well as letting the people, especially those that have elected those commissioners and those locally elected people, to do the job they've been elected to do.
Let's move on to round 3. As a reminder, each candidate will receive a separate question, starting with Mr. Huntsman. We are fighting a war against a virus and its devastating health and economic consequences. But we know how we will get past this. We know we will get past this. And once we do, what is tomorrow's war and how should we prepare for it?
It's a thoughtful question. We know so little about the war that we've been waging, and I have to offer kudos to our state of Utah colleagues for doing their best, because nobody wants to fail when lives are on the line, and I think that's important to recognize. There may have been shortcomings in terms of relationships along the way, or insufficient support for small business, or overly burdensome paperwork for people coming into our state. But by and large, everyone's tried to do their best, and I think that should be saluted. We're going to get through this, and this is why my whole thesis of a rebirth is so exciting, because we shouldn't fear this moment in history. We should embrace it. This is what America's built for. This is what our state's built for. That's what entrepreneurs and innovators are built for. They dream for market disruption so they can do something different, and they can go counterwise to conventional wisdom. So as we go forward, I'm guessing there will be other types of epidemics, maybe, that become pandemics, and it, of course, has to do with the geography covered, the difference between an epidemic and a pandemic. And I think we're going to be smarter and better able to deal with that going forward. But I think the biggest challenge we're going to have in terms of the next virus is the virus called intellectual property theft, because the Chinese have learned how to steal people's intellectual property, and it is the greatest cancer now invading our system of innovation, job creation, and business. And the fact that the president has taken after China on this very subject, I think is really important, but we're going to have to be more vigilant than ever before in terms of protecting what it is we do here, what it is we innovate here, and what it is we manufacture here.
Mr. Cox, in February, Utah's unemployment rate was at 2.5%, which left many sectors of our economy struggling to find qualified employees. As of today, approximately 8% of Utah's working population has applied for unemployment benefits. As governor, what will you do to help Utah's workforce recover, to ensure that our human capital is globally competitive, and to encourage job growth and capital investment in Utah?
Thank you, Teresa. This really is the question. Of all the questions that have been asked and all the answers given, there is nothing more important right now in this moment of time than that question. How do we get people back to work? There are a couple pieces of this that are important. Over the past few years, we've been reimagining what education can look like here in our country. One of the biggest mistakes that we've made is this idea that every kid needs a bachelor's degree. Of course, that's important and it's a wonderful thing, but it's led to two very serious problems. One is, of course, that a bachelor's degree in college is not for everyone. Our young people have different capacities and different opportunities. We have to start investing more in our trade and tech institutions here in the state. And by doing that, of course, that will give us the ability to help retrain the workforce of the future and the workforce of now. Look, one of the concerns, and going back to the last question, the war that we're going to be fighting, it's the same war that we were fighting before. It's going to be worse, though, and that is mental health issues, opioid addiction, deaths of despair. These are economic deaths, and they were here before this disaster hit and struck. They're going to be here after, and so we must continue to invest in those institutions, in those tools to give people an opportunity. Look, work is an eternal principle. Work makes people healthy. Work makes people happy. And there is dignity in all work. And so now we have this opportunity to realign our work. We've been working with the Department of Workforce Services to do an analysis, not just on unemployment, but on every sector of the economy and how high the unemployment is in those sectors. Some sectors of our economy are actually doing very well. The technology sector is one of those. Silicon Slopes and others, fastest growing sector of the economy, fastest growing in the nation. We have an opportunity now to retrain a workforce, get them retooled quickly and get them those jobs that are available so that they can participate in the modern economy and Utah can lead the nation going forward.
Mr. Hughes, Utah was built with a sense of community and with collaboration. However, national trends have shown that there was plenty of social distancing because of partisan politics before the phrase became part of our health lexicon. If elected governor, how will you foster the social capital and collaboration of our state for economic benefit?
Thank you. Great question. This isn't just what my position is as a candidate. I think it's my track record as a public servant, a member of our state House of Representatives, and as Speaker of the House. I think we had some tough issues in our state that we confronted. Religious liberty and anti-discrimination. Finding common ground with very disparate groups, I think, was very hard. It was one of the hardest things we did in that 2015 session, with a big session that was. And we found common ground and brought people together. We've done this on Operation Rio Grande, where we've had people experiencing homelessness. We have this national trend of warehousing people, which is inhumane and allows people to be preyed upon by those that cartels, drug cartels, the lawlessness and things like that. Largest multi-jurisdictional effort since the Winter Olympics, and I worked hard on that. I got outside my lane, went into an abandoned storefront right there across the street from St. Vincent's, and made people that wanted to talk to the speaker about any topic have to wade through that experience and see what was going on. We brought a lot of people together, and that was not a partisan effort. Even our pay for performance, where we were trying to reach out and help children that needed early intervention, but we don't have the tax dollars to do it. How do we bring people together on an issue that could easily fall between partisan lines and make sure we were helping those children that might not be prepared for our public schools? We found a smart public-private partnership to do that. And even the medical cannabis bill, which was going to size up to be a very expensive and really contentious battle between two sides that were thoughtful. One that wanted to find alternative ways to address health issues, another side that didn't want to see a Schedule I narcotic become legal in the state. And we brought the most ardent sides together, and we found common ground. So I think it's in the track record that I bring to this, and it's something that as governor I would continue to do.
Mr. Wright, the pandemic has shown us some economic inequities in our community. It's shown us some economic inequities in our country. And we know that Utah's population is becoming more and more diverse. How will your economic priorities be inclusive to all residents of the state, including our diverse populations? And further, how will your policies be geographically inclusive?
Great question. Thank you, Teresa. I will tell you, the pandemic has shown a lot of things. It's exposed a lot of things. It's exposed a lot of opportunities. And this is our time to seize the moment and to learn from them. The greatest thing that you can do for any individual in any socioeconomic class is to provide a top quality education. Our public education system in the state of Utah is one of the finest, in my opinion, and it needs our support at the highest level now that we have these challenges that we have coming out of the pandemic. We see in a lot of areas of our state intergenerational poverty. Children that show up to the classroom knowing a lot less words than their counterparts, and they fall behind. And because they fall behind, sometimes they don't catch up. So I would answer the question by saying we need to make sure that as we come out of this pandemic, that we're supporting our public education system at the highest level possible, which means having an education recovery program that provides adequate pay for our teachers. We have not shown that we prioritize public education by the way we have paid and treated our teachers. There's been a shortage for too long. There's been deficiencies in the classroom where they're not getting enough support. They're not getting the professional development that they feel that they need. And I will tell you that a right bishop administration will change that, because I said it earlier, you can tell a society's priorities by the way they spend their money. And it's time for us to show, not by even spending more, that we can prioritize and reallocate resources to get them into the classroom where we can serve the populations that are in our society. And we need to make sure everybody has the same opportunity to learn. And if we do that, we will succeed, because our human capital is the greatest asset that we have in the state of Utah. And the only way to overcome intergenerational poverty and have everybody have the same opportunities, no matter where they live geographically or where they come from, is to provide the same educational opportunities so that they can rise to the occasion, they can meet their potential, and they can see hope and work hard to achieve their God-given talent and their destiny. And if we do that with public education, that will be the best way to serve them.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. We've now arrived at round 4. As you may recall, each candidate gets the same question in this round, but we are adding an extra minute to their time allotment should they wish to address any of the topics that arose in round 3 addressed to their other candidates. Here is the question, and I'll start with you, Mr. Cox. Economic turmoil often leads to periods of great innovation. As businesses work through this crisis, they are focused on not only how to save their businesses, but also how to come out of this stronger, leaner, and more strategic. Why are you the person to help Utah's economy and government do the same? How will you make Utahns feel safe, economically secure, and confident in our future?
Thank you, Teresa. I feel very fortunate to have this opportunity. Some people may not know this, but I ran a telecommunications company for 10 years during the Great Recession, and we doubled in size during that Great Recession. I was also the Sanpete County Commissioner during the Great Recession. We were able to balance our budgets without raising taxes. Those two experiences, I think, uniquely prepared me for this opportunity. I was also asked to serve on Governor Herbert's Economic Council during the Great Recession as the only rural representative there. We've heard a lot of talk today about rural Utah. Every 4 years, we have a lot of people that pander for rural voters. I am a rural voter and understand uniquely those challenges that impact the people of the state of Utah. And through those experiences, I've learned a couple things. What I've learned most is that government is not going to bring us out of this recession. Government was never designed to solve all of our problems. That's one of the mistakes that we make, is this concept that as governor, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to magically solve all of the problems. But what I've learned over the past years through my experience in business and in government is that the people of Utah are resilient. The people of Utah are incredible. They are going to solve these problems. When we were looking coming out of the Great Recession, and Derek was part of this, what we could do to really rebuild the economy of the state of Utah, it wasn't a new government program. It was actually the exact opposite. It was, let's look at every business regulation we have on the books right now, and then let's see those regulations that are no longer necessary, those regulations that are inhibiting business in the state of Utah. There were about 400 of them, by the way, and we took those 400 regulations, we removed them, and what happened? We unleashed the entrepreneurs of the state of Utah and built the best economy in the country. And that's exactly what we're going to do again. It's not government that's going to do that, it's the people. And it's not just that we're really good at business, it's that we lead the nation in volunteerism. We lead the nation in charitable giving. We care about each other. Government will never be big enough to solve all of our problems, big enough to help everyone that's struggling. But we can do that, and we do that. And it's the reason that we are the envy of the nation, and it's exactly the blueprint for us to get out of this. Those answers are not going to come from China. They're not going to come from Washington, D.C. They're not going to come from somewhere else. They're going to come from Utahns, the heart of Utahns. That's what makes us special. Now, I just want to you said I could talk about anything for just a few seconds. I want to talk a little bit about telework and its power. I only have 28 seconds left, but I started an experiment about a year ago with the governor's permission where we had 130 workers who volunteered to work from home for 3 to 5 days. Now, many of us have been doing this during the pandemic, and we've learned a lot through that, but some amazing things happened. We took cars off the road. They were actually happier than their colleagues doing the same thing. We took pollution out of the air, and they increased their productivity by 20%. That's a blueprint for how we can do things better, and now it means that rural Utahns can apply for those jobs, and if you grew up, you could take that job with you and move back home.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Mr. Hughes, it's a long question. I'll read it again, though. Economic turmoil often leads to periods of great innovation. As businesses work through this crisis, they are focused on not only how to save their businesses, but how to come out of this stronger, leaner, and more strategic. Why are you the person to help Utah's economy and government do the same? And how will you make Utahns feel safe, economically secure, and confident in our future?
Thank you. The reason how I will do that as governor is I would be doing that right now. I am finding, and we are seeing, to your point, and I wrote it down, stronger, leaner, and more strategic. We're finding that businesses are coming up with smarter, leaner, more strategic ways to keep their doors open given the circumstances we're in. We don't have to have a government mandated, we're going to trickle the economy in, we're going to let it slow down, we're going to have colors of when it starts. If you let these business owners, and you let them, not the government, but let them figure out how to keep people safe, themselves safe, they know what to do. I saw a movie theater where they just made an impromptu drive-in theater outside their movie theater. You have so many smart solutions that are being done to try and understand this new climate we're in with a virus we don't have a cure for, we don't have a vaccine for. It's a different time. It will change consumer behaviors. But my full faith is in the people of this state. And I know that you don't have to send them letters, draconian letters, telling them what they can or can't do. We need to put our faith in those business leaders because their interests align with all of ours. We all need that stronger economy. We need those things to happen, and it will not come from a convened panel trying to tell everyone how to do it. It will come with people with those aligned and mutual interests being able to do it themselves. I'll say this. We've seen regulatory creep. We've seen our regulatory climate get more onerous. I've had business owners come to me and explain the frustrations that they've confronted as they've tried to grow their business or the things that they've seen as government's barriers to entry. A Hughes administration, I think, is a public service. We would approach people who have no interest in a public job or a state job, might not have even thought of it or could maybe even afford it. But we're going to bring innovators. We're going to bring people that are leaders in the areas that we would ask them to serve and be public servants in and bring that empathy. That is the power of leadership. It's the empathy, understanding that life's a two-way street, knowing that what decisions you make and how they impact people and their lives, knowing that from your own personal experiences. A Hughes administration will have a cabinet of those leaders, and we will see the administrative creep. We won't keep going that way. We won't see the same familiar faces. Lastly, let me just do some retorts with 37 seconds left. Our Lieutenant Governor, I'm with you on that we're a state, we're builders. I'm not against telecommunicating, but let's just be honest about it. That's professional services. We can't say we're going to build and get manufacturing going, or we're going to do all these things, and then talk about telecommuting. We can do them both. That's fine. But sometimes I think that's stated a little bit stronger for rural Utah or for anywhere. We need to do more than just professional services. We need to see that economy grow. And I got 8 seconds left, so I'll just leave it there.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Mr. Wright, I'll ask you the latter half of the question, which is, why are you the person to help Utah's economy and government be stronger, leaner, and more strategic? And how will you make Utahns feel safe, economically secure, and confident in our future?
I'm the person because I'm the only business person in this race. I'm on the stage with 3 professional politicians. They've served the state and the country well. I appreciate them, and I want to thank them for their service. But I'm from the private sector. I'm a business person. I know how to get businesses back on track. I know how to grow the economy. And let me tell you how you do that. You start with the fundamentals. In any endeavor, it's about the fundamentals. If you're good at the fundamentals in any endeavor, whether you're John Stockton on the Utah Jazz or you're trying to put an economy back on track, it comes down to discipline and making sure you understand the fundamentals of what drives the private sector and what builds our economy. And unfortunately, I've seen time and time again in my life and in my business career, politicians who are professional. They're good. They say a lot of great things, but they don't really understand the private sector. And it's not their fault. They don't understand because they haven't come from there. They haven't been in the trenches with their employees, building a business, making hard decisions, looking at what regulations do to their business, understanding what it takes to hire more people, to expand, what it means to deliver a service, what it means to have a business enterprise. Those are skills that you can only gain in the trenches. I have been that CEO in the trenches with my employees, working hard every day. We built our business in the Great Recession when everybody said it was impossible. They laughed. They said there was no way we'd get it done. And we stuck to the fundamentals. We did the things that were hard. We made the cuts. We made the hard decisions. We did things right. We understood what supply and demand was. And I watched time and time again, government just has a struggle with this. I understand that government is not a business, but there are business principles that can be applied to government that we don't see. Government spends too much. They take too much of our money. They expand programs. They hardly ever cut programs. If we want to instill confidence in citizens, the best thing to do is get back to those fundamentals. And it gets back to my short-term economic recovery plan, and that is go line by line through this budget, cut out the waste, make sure that our spending matches our priorities, and make sure that the citizens of Utah have confidence in us as leaders. There's nobody better to do that at this time in the state of Utah than the business person in this race. A business person will understand how to rebuild this economy faster than a politician. And I'll just close by saying, I'm going to prove when I'm elected governor that you don't have to be from rural Utah to care about rural Utah. Rural Utah has been left behind for a long time. And if I applied that same logic that, every 4 years we talk about rural Utah but nothing happens, you have to care about rural Utah, you have to live there to care about it, well then that would mean that the people that live in rural Utah don't care about the Wasatch Front, and I would never make that assertion. I care about rural Utah because those are Utahns, and they deserve equal support to the citizens along the Wasatch Front. And with my Lieutenant Governor, Congressman Rob Bishop, who lives north of the Davis-Dixon line and is from rural Utah in Box Elder County, we're going to prove that we care more about rural Utah than any administration the state's ever seen.
Thank you. Mr. Huntsman, why are you the person to help Utah's economy and government emerge from this stronger, leaner, and more strategic? And how will you make Utahns feel safe, economically secure, and confident in our future?
Well, thank you for the question. Because I've worked on issues that have brought about greater economic strength and resiliency. And that's been recognized. People might say they don't like a thing or two that I've done, but nobody will tell you that we did not hit a home run as it relates to our economic vitality agenda. So I think that there are going to be a couple of things that will be important as we go forward. One will be ensuring that we have adequate capital for expansion, because confidence comes with businesses that are stable and that are growing. Companies that are stronger get there because they're able to present a business plan, they're able to operate in ways that attract capital. There's probably $1 trillion floating around in the marketplace today between venture capital and private equity. We have, last I looked 2 days ago, we have probably less than half of what Colorado has. So why is this important? It might just be a statistic that nobody cares about. It's important to me because it is a lifeblood for any business. That gives it strength, that gives it confidence, that allows its people who are operating it to know that they're going to have a better tomorrow. I also think that a combination of business and government experience is really important. You know, I've been criticized for taking a call from my president to go overseas to work. Some people will never forgive you for that. A lot of people think it's pretty great. And here's why I think they do. Because you learn a lot when you are out serving your country as an American, when you're learning about new markets and new opportunities and connectivity with the state, where I worked with on all kinds of issues related to exports coming out of Utah, business problems that we were resolving. So I think coming out of a background that is both familiarity with the key markets of Asia, key markets of Europe, namely Russia, and an ability, having run the state before, where we got a lot of kudos and accolades, best state for business, on and on and on. Probably, I would hope, and I'm not very good at promoting myself, but I would hope that there would be enough there to say, Huntsman's maybe learned more than he knew before. And that may have some applicability here. And our state might benefit from those relationships and those connections that are going to be critical. We talk about imagining our future, which is the most exciting thing I think ahead of us, because I'm a real optimist when I look forward. I'm not a pessimist. We're not looking back, we're looking forward. I think they will contribute enormously to the key things of getting capital into the marketplace and keeping our brain power and attracting additional brain power, the lifeblood of making any kind of economy work.
We've now arrived at round 5. Our thanks to all the candidates for keeping within your time constraints. In this round, we've asked each candidate to submit a question for each of the other candidates. We've randomly drawn from those questions and will anonymously pose one question to each candidate submitted by their fellow candidates. This round will start with Mr. Hughes and conclude with Mr. Cox. Mr. Hughes, in your 16 years as an elected politician, as a state representative, member of the Executive Appropriations Committee, the House Legislative Expense Oversight Committee, the Legislative Audit Subcommittee, Speaker of the House, and on the Legislative Management Committee, what would you say is your greatest accomplishment?
Well, that's a nice question. It's a daunting one. I will tell you that, look, it's hard to pick one, but I will tell you that I think the first year when I was Speaker of the House, it was 2015, and that was a year where I was the new kid on the block. We had a governor that had been there for a while. We had President Niederhauser had been the Senate president, and I was kind of the new guy. And if you think back to that 2015 general session, that was a year where we had the Religious Liberties and Anti-Discrimination Bill. That's the year where we had the Obamacare expansion, Medicaid expansion battle that we had. I don't know how else to describe it. That was the year that we saw a lot of impactful transportation reform, how we were going to we worked with the chamber closely on how were we going to long-term, as you saw vehicle miles travel, how are we going to handle and how would we reform our transportation funding system to accommodate for the times that we were in. We hadn't seen reform of that level for decades, and we worked that through as well. I would say that year was probably the most difficult and most challenging, but also the most rewarding in terms of the generational and impactful things that we were able to accomplish that year. But when I hear myself even say that, it doesn't include the things that we've done fighting Operation Rio Grande, where we had these competing drug cartels fighting for market share, and we had to do something different than what was being done before, and we had to do it with a broad coalition. It doesn't include, anyway, so I would just say that I think it's been the honor of my life to serve in those positions that you've described, and I think that our goal when I was there is we wanted to leave the place better than we found it. And I believe that we did. There's still much work to be done, but I think that is, I think that would be the best answer I could give you and do I get a minute left? I mean, that is a record here, you people. You guys got to give me a minute somewhere in some debate in the future. I get credit for that minute, but that's all I got, so.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Mr. Wright, The recent tax plan addressing some of Utah's pressing budgetary concerns was quickly repealed shortly after it passed. What is your plan to address these pressing issues facing our state's budget and to pass meaningful reform?
Thank you. There was 3 parts of the tax reform bill that most citizens, as I traveled the state, thought were positive, and then there were 3 that they struggled with. Let's go through them really quickly. Number 1 is the income tax cut from 4.95 to 4.66. I didn't meet a conservative Utahn out there that didn't want their income tax cut. Number 2, we brought our state code in line with our federal code. We know that Trump got tax reform done, the president got tax reform done first time since 1986, and we were bringing our tax code in line so that citizens could take the personal exemption. And number 3 is we were eliminating the tax or reducing the tax on Social Security for seniors. People really like that. I say we, I wasn't a member of the legislature, but the state was attempting to reduce the tax on Social Security. And I didn't meet anyone that didn't think that was good for seniors that are on fixed incomes that are struggling to make ends meet with rising costs. The 3 things that people struggled with were, number 1, the sales tax on food. I addressed that earlier. If it's wrong to tax food at 4.875 under the bill that was repealed, it's wrong to tax it under at 1.75 under the current law. I think it should be put to 0. The second thing people struggled with was the gas tax. What essentially happened was a closing of a loophole so that wholesalers of petroleum had to pay a sales tax. When you charge a wholesaler, we know what happens in the business world. It gets passed along to the consumer, so essentially it was a gas tax increase. And finally, the third thing that people struggled with was the sales tax on services. And when you start going down the road of a new revenue generation in tax policy, and it appears like you're picking winners and losers, in other words, veterinarians pay, but maybe attorneys don't, and it appears that way. I'm not accusing anyone of doing that. I'm just saying it appears that way. Citizens really start to wonder what's going on. So at the end of the day, there was 2 big problems that were trying to be tackled with tax reform. Number 1 is we've been taking $700 million from the general fund to fund transportation. And the reason we've had to do that is because we know the gas tax has been declining because our fuel efficiency is going up and there's more electric and hybrid vehicles on the road. This is why you need somebody new. This problem has been building for a long time. It was never addressed. There was plenty of people on this stage that could have addressed that along the way, and it didn't happen. Second, the income tax is constitutionally earmarked for education. And before the pandemic, our income tax had grown at a rate where we were taking money in the general fund for transportation, but we had too much money in income tax. So it was really just trying to move some funds around. I applaud legislative leadership for going to the education community and working together to solve the earmark problem, the constitutional earmark with education, by prioritizing education funding and not having to do a tax reform bill like we saw. The omnibus bill in 2019 was problematic. It had way too many things in it. It was too hard for people to understand. They didn't have enough time to vet it. So the last challenge is we need to solve the transportation funding. And if I had more time, I would tell you how I would do that. But we need to solve it because right now we are not getting enough revenue to fund our transportation infrastructure. There needs to be a reallocation of resources.
Mr. Huntsman, when Governor Herbert took office in 2009, Utah's unemployment rate was the highest it had been in decades at nearly 8%. With COVID-19, Utah's next governor will face similar challenges from day one. What lessons, either good or bad, can be learned from Governor Herbert's response to the last crisis, the Great Recession, and to make sure that Utah emerges from this current crisis as soon as possible?
Well, let me give great credit to Gary Herbert, a good man, and he was a great lieutenant governor. I enjoyed working with him. His happiest day was when I was called off to China, because that's where he became governor. And I enjoyed working around the state with him. I really did. The lesson from that period is to make sure that going into a difficult economic period, you've got an economy. You can control the surfboard, but you can't control the wave. So the lesson here is, how do you control the surfboard when that wave is coming? And sometimes you don't know the wave is coming, as we've just learned with the pandemic. And I think probably the most important thing that we did out of the 10-point plan, all of which was done before the recession, and I think we probably survived the recession in much better shape in terms of the other side because of the seeds that were planted, that gave us durability and resilience and a sense of competitiveness. But probably the most important part, just hearing Thomas go on so brilliantly about tax reform, I have to say was probably the work we did on tax reform, because it was very instructive and it set the stage for the global marketplace, the national marketplace, saying Utah's in business. They've got the first flat tax in the United States. They've worked on their competitiveness of their business tax. They took the sales tax almost completely off food. That took us 2 years to get that done. It carried 100% of the legislative vote. We got every Democrat and every Republican on that tax reform effort, which is, in today's world, that seems like, nearly an impossibility. But it was an investment like that that allowed us to weather those difficult years. Why? Because capital is a coward, and capital will flee wherever it perceives there to be risk in the marketplace, and it will park itself in a safe haven, even during a difficult time. And we made the state a safe haven. It was fleeing other markets in the area, and it was parking itself here. And I think, but for some of those changes to our economic development competitiveness, we wouldn't have won that capital. And brain power would have left, and it would have gone to some of the regional markets, and they would have benefited. So I think that was part of it. And I think Gary is an excellent manager. And I think he did a great job in terms of managing his way through, keeping in contact with all the key constituencies, managing to the best of his ability, and I give him great credit for that. And it was a great pleasure working for such a gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Huntsman. Mr. Cox, you will undoubtedly draw from your experience as lieutenant governor should you be elected governor. But I'd like you to reflect a little bit on one thing that you would have done differently with now the benefit of hindsight within your term as lieutenant governor, and specifically thinking about the economy or economic development.
That's a fascinating question, and I like the question better where I get to tell you the best thing I did over the years, but apparently Greg got that question. So look, as I get a chance to reflect, and it's something I think we all do, we all look back on the choices we've made, on the careers that we've had, on the experiences that we have been able to experience. As I think through some of the mistakes that we've made over time, and looking back, I think obviously the ones that are happening now are the most current. And there's no question that in the fog of war, as we move through this unprecedented challenge that we're looking at, there are certainly mistakes that have been made as we've looked back. One of those mistakes was we tried to use some new technology, some geofencing technology, to keep people who had the virus, who may be coming into Utah. Every expert we talked to said, you can do everything right, but if you have the virus coming in from other places, then you're going to have challenges, and the pandemic is going to continue to grow. We know that because that's the reason the president shut down the airline industry, basically, bringing people from Europe, bringing people from China into our country. And then, of course, we were one of the best states when it came to managing that outbreak. And so we were worried that people from California, where states were locked down, would be coming into our state and bringing that virus with them. And so in that type of environment, you do everything you possibly can to save Utahns and save the economy, right? That's every day we were closed was hurting people. And so we knew that if we could keep the virus from coming in, but we didn't want to be heavy-handed, and so we decided, the governor decided, hey, look, is there technology where we can have people voluntarily let us know if they've had the virus or if they have symptoms so that we can refer them to testing? And as sometimes happens, people said, hey, there's this great technology, it's really easy. As people cross into our borders, they'll get a text on their phone, and that text will tell them exactly what they need to do. Just fill out this form and let us know, and we can help refer you someplace to go. Well, as often happens, that technology was not proven, and what ended up happening was that people that lived along the border started getting these incredibly annoying alerts on their phone every few hours that were waking them up and causing all kinds of problems. And so we immediately backed off from that. And I think that's the most important thing about governing, and it's a thing that's been lost amongst politicians in today's age, and that is a humility humility to admit when you're wrong and to move on, to do things differently, to apologize and move forward. That's what we did, and we stopped that program. I'm glad we did, and that's just one example of mistakes we've made. But it's how we respond to those mistakes that makes us who we are, and that's real leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. We've now arrived at our final round. This is your last opportunity to address all of the EDCUtah investors, the chamber members, and others who might have tuned in this evening to talk to us for one final moment about why those voters who are concerned about Utah's economy, why they should vote for you. We've allotted 1 minute for each answer, and we will start with Mr. Wright. We'll conclude with Mr. Hughes. Mr. Wright.
This race is not about me. This is about Utah. This is about Utah's future. It's about making sure Utah has as much success in the future that it's had in the past. To do that, it's going to take somebody that has the hunger, the hustle, and the humility to make it happen. Somebody not from government, from the private sector, who understands businesses, who built a business with a team, with his employees during the Great Recession, when times were difficult and times were tough. I am that candidate. I will approach this job the same way I've approached everything that I've done in my life, and that's with everything I have. I will work hard for the state every day. I will do it in an honest and transparent way. I will hustle. I will make it happen for Utah, and I will always do it with the humility to have the answers. They just need a government that understands the proper role of government, that assists them in making things happen. I'm Thomas Wright. I'm running for governor because I believe it's time for a change, and that these great gentlemen have had their chance, and I hope you'll support me.
Mr. Huntsman.
Well, because one great gentleman has had a chance, I think that one great gentleman might be even in a better position to lead out, because I think that's exactly where we are. We're entering a new period of history, one where leadership and vision and experience will be absolutely critical. And for those who think, well, the propaganda out there is, well, Huntsman will leave, no such luck. The most important work we will do is right here and together in a state that we love. But finally, let me just say that I want the work that I do, both campaign-wise and if we're lucky enough to get elected, to inspire and strengthen trust. Because we have a trust deficit now in this state and in this country when it comes to believability in our institutions and our leaders. And I want that to change, because the next generation is only going to be as successful as they're able to rally and band together and get important things done for their communities. And trust is a cancer when there's lack of it. So I want to make sure that I'm focused on that as well as just running a good race. Thank you. It's a great honor.
Thank you, Mr. Huntsman. Mr. Cox.
Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 6 years, I've had the opportunity to serve as your lieutenant governor, and it has been the honor of a lifetime. I appreciate Governor Herbert's willingness to choose me, a kid from Sanpete County, to carry on this legacy. When we set out to run for office, my wife and I made a decision to visit all 248 cities and towns in Utah, something that hasn't been done. We made it to 205 of those before life as we know it changed. And for the other 43, we're on our way. Don't worry, we're going to make it back. I've had an opportunity to serve as your lieutenant governor. I'm proud of our record. I would hold what we have done over the past 6 years up against any other administration anywhere in the country. Together, we built the strongest economy in the country, and together we're going to do it again. Senator Henderson and I are here. We've always been here, and we aren't going anywhere as we stick together to build the most robust economy and make this life the best it can possibly be for the citizens of Utah. Thank you so much for your support, and we look forward to your vote.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Mr. Hughes, with the final word.
Thank you. I just want to say that I approach a lot of these issues as a small business owner. Our state constitution wisely has a legislative branch that's part-time. It doesn't pay the bills. What supports my family is my small business. I have to make a payroll. I have to make overhead, or cover overhead. So that's what informs me as having been a public servant, but also as a business owner. I'll just say we've talked about some tough issues here tonight. And we're in unprecedented and tough times. And sometimes you'll have those tough conversations, which we've had. But I think that what I love about this state is that we don't buckle. You can have the social media storms. You can have the special interests threaten your election. You can have the media attack your every move and motivation. But I've been through those moments. I know that we've stood firm and that we've accomplished a lot of important things. What you get in me is I don't buckle. The sky's the limit. We can do a lot with work and grit. If you elect me as your governor, if I earn your support, together we'll get it done. Thank you.
That concludes our Republican primary gubernatorial candidate forum. We thank the candidates for their time. We thank them for their passion and concern for our state. And we wish them good luck and good health in the weeks ahead.
Our thanks goes out to the staff of the Salt Lake Chamber, EDCUtah, the Grand America, and to all of the campaigns and candidates for their support of this event. Thank you and good night.